Alright guys, that's Kremp again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. The stage is set for Major 3. The bracket has officially been determined into big storylines going into the Major. And last night was a big one for OpTic in general. FormaL getting his first win in a very long time in the HaLo domain. A remarkable losers bracket run. Is that going to give the COD team something to think about going into the Major that is upcoming? Lots to talk about today. Very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We are going to start there because it was one of the big talking points of the weekend. And honestly, I got to watch a bit of this last night. Obviously, it got kind of late over here in Europe, as the HaLo event always do. I will say, the MLG events back in the day, the way they used to be run, they, like, the timings for Europe were terrible. And I think that from a CDL perspective, like, the way that the league has gone over the last few years, it's not been great. It doesn't have the character of these events back in the day. But honestly, these MLG events, and even it's the same with HaLo nowadays, like, they will go on until ridiculous o'clock in the morning. And I know that those of you who are around in Europe who are watching competitive COD back in the day remember the days of, you know, these events finishing at 4, 5 in the morning and stuff like that. Nowadays, the timings are certainly more, let's say, global friendly on some level. But it doesn't mean that it's not a little good late night watch, right? So, look, HaLo is interesting to watch. Look, it is the same game that's been around for a couple of years now. High-level HaLo, though, still is absolutely top tier. I still kind of wish there was a mini-map, right? But that's not the way that they run things. But anyway, OpTic HaLo, FormaL formed this team, you guys remember it, in the off-season, deciding between whether he was even going to come back to COD, whether he was going to retire, and he was only going to play HaLo again if he could form this exact team. He managed to break up the World Championship winners, formed this team on OpTic, and, well, the rest since then is pretty much history, right? They made an unreal run. They've been not struggling, but they've not been dominant in the online domain in recent times. They come to the Major. They looked a bit shaky in groups. Of course, it was their own Major, right? In Texas, in Arlington, at that arena. And a great facility, great venue for the fans, I'm sure, to enjoy. And they came out in winners round 1. They lost to Shopify Rebellion. They went down to losers. They made an unreal losers run all the way through. They went to a double best of 7 grand finals, which is not something we do in Call of Duty. They won the first set 7-0. They probably should have won the second set 4-2, but eventually they lose the game 6, but it goes to game 7, and they get the job done in the end. So, unbelievable performance, like, great kickoff for the HaLo season for sure, like, so competitive between these teams at the very top, and it's FormaL's, you know, ambition to form this team that seems to be paying off so far. When they got to LAN, they got the win. So Legend, Renegade, Bound, and FormaL, they're your HaLo Major 1 champions. And, you know, this was a big talking point yesterday. 12,000 likes on this tweet, especially because for many OpTic fans, I think they've kind of been going through it lately, right? Because the HaLo team has not had much to play apart from online stuff. The COD team has had a turbulent season, to say the very least. But this was something to celebrate, right? But I mean, what a bracket run. You don't get this nowadays in COD, that brackets go this far. But even look at that. They won TSM beat TSM in the first round of losers 3-0. Infamous, Nemesis. I think they even reverse swept Nemesis in that series in the the 7th match of the losers bracket. But you know, they had to win 1, 2, 3. They beat Space Station, that's 4. They beat FaZe, that's 5. They then had to beat Shopify in another series, that was 6, and then 7. So they won 7 series on the spin, OpTic, in order to win this tournament. And yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. So as FormaL says, it's been so long since I can make a first place tweet because they've been cursed, FormaL and this OpTic team, by second place finishes now for the last couple of years. But FormaL formed this roster and he pulled the Warlord moves in order to get back to winning ways, and that's what's happened so far. Of course, the big one is going to try and be champions, or the World Championship this year for HaLo, but still, it's a better start as they could really ask for. So proud of the team for all the adversity we faced. Losers round 1 to champions. So, yeah, this one is for you guys, he says. So, really cool stuff. Thought it was nice, this pretty cold comment from Legend after they lost that game 6 in the end. And this is now where FormaL sits. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that FormaL is the greatest controller esports player of all time. I know that people, maybe even nowadays, could argue Shotzzy. I know that people have tried to over the last couple of years. I never really bought it personally, just because I think FormaL is just such a well-rounded player. like, that's what makes FormaL so great, is that not only is he incredibly feared by anyone who spawns into the server against him, but his comms, his clutch factor, his experience, like everything about FormaL makes him just such a complete player, and he's won everything for years. I mean, obviously the conversation is where FormaL is in like all-time esports. In controller side, you know, console FPS as it used to kind of be known, sure, absolute no-brainer, but in just general esports, like how does FormaL compare to someone like Faker, right? I mean, look, it's a conversation that is obviously not one for today, but you know what I'm saying anyway. So Call of Duty, 23 tournament victories, 2017 world champion, 2 times MVP, won the world championship in Halo, has now won 9 tournaments over there, $1 million plus in prize earnings, and I thought it was just an incredible story that they did manage to come out on top despite a pretty shaky start. So will that give some motivation on some level to the OpTic Call of Duty team to try and replicate something similar? Of course, it's not their event. The most recent major in Dallas was their event, but obviously that wasn't pretty, but they had so much drama going in. At least for OpTic's COD team this event, they have less drama going in. They've at least had a roster now for a good few weeks, so they should be able to take some optimism in there. But as Dashy says, bros, relentless. Congrats to you and the boys. That was insane. This is the way that it finished in the Call of Duty side for this stint. OpTic, after their loss to FaZe yesterday, which I'm not saying they should have won, but they probably should have at least been a game 5. We talked about it last night. They ended as the 7th seed. Now, they were helped by Ravens getting slammed by Thieves. So Ravens came in and got hot 3-0'd. That put them down to the 8th seed. And it was really tough for Ravens, actually, because look, you might have, as Ravens going into that series, said that, oh, well, look, we're playing Thieves, it doesn't really matter, let's just get some reps in. But actually, Ravens really did need to win a map there, because they didn't win a map. Thieves were the number 1 seed, and Thieves would love the idea of 3-0ing Ravens last night, which they did, because then that means they get to play Ravens again. So on some level, I feel bad for Ravens, because they've ended up getting slammed by Thieves and having to play them again first round of the major, but also it is kind of their fault because, you know, just win a map. I think if they literally just won a map yesterday, there'd have been 10 in 12 map counts. That would have been better than OpTic's map count in terms of percentage, and OpTic would have been starting in the 8th seed playing Thieves round 1. But no, it's now the other way around. So we'll see what the bracket looks like in a second. Gentlemates closed out 0-5. Cloud9 are the 11th seed. Falcons are the 10th seed. Rocker in 9th. And again, it's tough for Rocker, right? Because just one more series would have been enough. With OpTic's map count, with Ravens map counts, you know, Rocker, their map count wasn't bad for a 1-4 team. They would have been fine had they just won another series. Won just one of those Game 5 Round 11s, which they eventually lost. But the seeding got real interesting. I mean, there were 5 teams at 4-1. You don't see that often at all. And of the teams that, I mean, Toronto ended up as the 5th seed at 4-1. And of course, the only series they lost was that one against Boston, which was controversial to say the least, that they kind of forfeited it. They didn't forfeit that series. They, I mean, wouldn't have been number 1, but they'd have been much higher. So puts them in an interesting spot. I don't think they'll be too unhappy about it, right? But, you know, again, round 1 of the major is pretty fascinating, and this is what it looks like. So let's start from the top and let's talk about some of the series that could play out here, right? Because certainly in the losers bracket, we are going to get some interesting series for the World Championship qualification spots as well. We'll actually have a quick look at how that looks now. So FaZe are currently sitting on 360 points. That's your number 1 seed. Thieves are at 310. They're only 50 points behind, so, you know, a couple of majors. If Thieves were to win the major, OpTic were, or like FaZe were to get second, still got OpTic at a second, then it would, or FaZe were to get third or something, right? Because let's be real, they're probably going to be there on the Sunday anyway. Then that can certainly change the tune of that. Toronto sitting pretty, as it were, in 3rd place. Surge in 4th. Ravens now kind of starting to become in no man's land down there in 5th. You've got Boston got to 150 after a great stint. You've got Heretics got to 140 after a great stint. OpTic at 130, you know, they are now the 8th seed and they are on the bubble of the teams below them. Gentlemates and Falcons are out of it, and then you've got Rocker and Cloud9 still in the conversation at 25 and 30 points behind respectively. Just to keep in mind, or respectively, just to keep in mind, major performances, top 6 gets you 30 points, top 4 gets you 45 points, top 3 gets you, what, 60 points? So I imagine, I think, yeah, pretty sure that's true. Top 2 gets you 75 points, and winning winning it gets you 100, right? So that's kind of where it sits for now. So Rocker, Cloud9, they need to get kind of top 6 bare minimum and then try and do it again at the final major. That will be the plan for them. This is how it looks. Thieves, Ravens, I mean, yeah, good luck. It is a tough start for Rex, right? Like, I rate Rex. I think he's going to be a good player, but to play Thieves online in your first series and then to play Thieves on LAN in your second series in a matchup that has been just horrible for Ravens so far this season. It is not a rivalry between those two teams, so good luck with that. And then they will drop down to losers, presumably, to play Rocker, a team that absolutely, desperately needs a win there. Like, you cannot afford anything else. I think Rocker shouldn't be too dissatisfied. Like, of any team that you would like to play dropping down from the winners bracket, Ravens have got to be up there. Kind of a brand new team. So, look, I mean, obviously, if you play Thieves, if Thieves were to lose to Ravens somehow, then, yeah, that is tough, right? Because if you are in Rocker's position, you do run the risk of the number 1 seed losing and all of a sudden you're out of the tournament immediately. But you do have the advantage of probably playing the Ravens in this case, which I think they'll be optimistic that they can win. That's the top side. Heretics Ultra is a real interesting series. On LAN, who knows? But that, of course, is going to be the home major for this team. We saw back in Madrid at the start of the season, it was kind of a home major on some level. Toronto did them a favor, right? They ran an event in Madrid and they got to experience some of that home crowd buff. So in Miami, is it really going to be a home major? Like, are there really going to be that many fans there rooting for the local team? Maybe there'll be some. More than likely, it's going to be a lot of OpTic fans there, but technically it's their home event, and we'll see if Ultra can get revenge. Ultra will certainly be, I would say, favourites in that series, but Heretics have played some great stuff lately, so that could probably go either way. Look, OpTic Gaming, they find themselves against the Boston Breach in the first round, and I think that honestly, for OpTic, given the fact that they were one of the weaker seeds from this stint after starting off 2-0 and then finishing out 0-3 in their final couple of series, they couldn't really ask for a better game. If you look at all the teams that were 4-1, who would OpTic prefer to play? Would you prefer to play Thieves, Heretics, Ultra, or Surge? Like, would you prefer any of those over Boston? Probably not. I rate Boston. I think they're pretty good. But if I'm OpTic, if there's one team of the 4-1 teams that I would want as my first round game, it's probably Boston, to be honest. You don't want to play Thieves. You don't want to play Surge. Heretics have your number, and Toronto have your number too. So Boston is the matchup. If OpTic could, like, hand select, they would probably pick, to be fair. And that's the one that they have. So, look, Boston, let's not forget, round 1 of the last major, they beat Thieves. So it's not like OpTic have an easy road here, but in terms of a starting series, it's probably one that OpTic would want to get, and look, there's going to be good energy for that series. And it's also a very important one, right? Because if OpTic win that series, they get top 6, they secure themselves 30 points. That puts them at 160. 160 with a couple more online qualifier wins, that should be enough to get you to champs. Boston, if they lose, you know, they're not guaranteed at all, but if Boston were to beat OpTic there, I would say that probably cements them at the World Championship, really, even if they lose everything from then on. I mean, it would probably be close, but realistically, if Boston beat OpTic, they get to 180. That's got to be enough to make it to champs, you would think. So, you know, that's a real important series. Surge FaZe, again, another absolute cracker, right? We've seen these guys play in recent times, and all of the series, with the exception of the most recent grand finals, were pretty damn close. Surge reckon they kind of run out of gas there a little bit, and FaZe's hardpointers looked a little bit shaky. Surge have been pretty good there. Look, rematch of last grand finals in the first round here, doesn't get much better than that. And then you look down to the losers bracket, LAG playing Heretics or Ultra, you've got Cloud9 playing Surge or FaZe. That's a real tough round 1 for C9 at the, like, when they really need a run, right? I mean, like, Cloud9 desperately need to get some wins. If both Cloud9 and Rocker get bopped out top 12, tough to imagine that either of those teams makes it to champs. But the big talking point that people are definitely honing in on to close out the video is this Falcons situation, because OpTic Boston, I mean, who's going to win? I would say that's kind of a 50-50 series right now. I think you can go either way, and the loser of that plays Falcons, as in plays Pred. So could you imagine the story of OpTic dropping down to losers, desperately needing to make something of a run, and they play Pred on LAN in the first rounds? That would be a mega story, and I'm not gonna lie, I could probably see it happening right now. So that's where we're gonna leave it for today. Very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.